Guten Morgen, guten Tag, konnichiwa, buongiorno. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Thank you all for finding time to join us today. But before we start, here are just some reminders to ensure a smooth experience. Kindly use a headset for sound clarity and to avoid feedback. Questions will be accommodated during the panel discussion. Kindly use the Q&A Zoom feature or send your questions via the chat box. My name is Martin Macalintal, Cultural Attaché in the French Embassy to the Philippines. And it is my pleasure indeed to welcome you all to the 14th International Silent Film Festival. In fact, our fans were uncertain if this festival would take place this year because of the pandemic, but precisely because of this new normal, the topic of today's roundtable is made even more relevant as we realize the importance of remembering our past, even just the pre-pandemic past, like last year when we could gather together with friends to watch films inside a movie house, or maybe even 100 years back when film was just invented and life was probably more simple. The different participating countries in this festival have been able to preserve their cultural heritage through film by preserving, restoring, archiving, and digitizing their films. It is interesting how from celluloid we have now developed digital formats that allow us to view these century-old films from different parts of the globe on our gadgets, laptops, and the safety of our homes. We have invited Professor Clodoaldo Del Mundo Jr. to moderate the exchanges. With a doctoral degree in communications from the University of Iowa in the US, he is a professor emeritus and a fellow. But to film enthusiasts, cinephiles in the Philippines, he is probably more popularly known as Doy Del Mundo, the screenplay writer of Filipino classics such as Manila sa Kuko ng Liwanag by no other than Lino Broca, which I think was recently restored by ABS-CBN, Batch 81 and Bayaning Third World by Mike De Leon, Kakaba, or even Pepot Artista, which Doy himself directed and which won Best Picture in Cinemalaya in 2005. Sir Doy also authored film essays and documentaries about corruption and urban poverty, and has published books including Native Resistance, Philippine Cinema and Colonialism from 1898 to 1941, Spirituality and the Filipino Film, direct essays on Filipino filmmakers, and most recently, Riding the Waves, 15 Years of Cinemalaya. Ladies and gentlemen, to facilitate this discussion this afternoon, I'd like to call on Professor Clodoaldo Del Mundo, Jr. Sir Doy, please take it away.
Thank you, Martin, for that introduction. I hope I'm able to live up to your nice intro. Let me start by talking about losing memory. Losing memory is a tragic occurrence that can happen to the human condition. The mind loses its hold on the past. It forgets its life before the onset of forgetfulness. It forgets relationships, friends, and even family members. The same condition can happen to the nation if we forget our cultural heritage. The effect may not be immediately apparent, but it can be debilitating, and indeed, it can be sad. Thanks to individuals who are concerned about heritage and tradition, and whose work is supported by equally concerned institutions, we are always reminded of the past. Today, we focus on film archiving, particularly archiving silent films. This is saving memory, making silent films talk to us. Our guests represent archives from various parts of the world: France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Philippines. Let's start with our first speaker. He is Don Gervin Arawan of the Film Development Council of the Philippines. Don started in the Film Development Council of the Philippines as the, the point person in establishing the cinematheques in Davao, Iloilo, and Zamboanga. Then he was assigned to be the executive director of the Philippine Film Export Services Office, which was involved in international productions in the country. Today, he is the lead officer of the Philippine Film Archive under the Film Development Council of the Philippines. Friends, Don Gervin Arawan.
Hi, Sir Doy. Good afternoon and good afternoon to all.
Don, would you start your presentation?
Okay, Sir Doy. Allow me to share my screen first. Okay. Alright. So, everyone, I'll be discussing right now funding archives, and just like any other institutions and other companies or corporation existing in the country and everywhere else, it started with the nature. Before the funds and the sources are being determined, it starts with the nature of the institution. It can either be public, which is actually a government-owned or a government-controlled institution, or a private one, which can either be a business-controlled, a non-government organization or institution, a foundation-based, a company-owned like ABS-CBN, and it can either be an individual film archive, which can handled by a specific private family or a person for in that case. Okay. For the Philippines, the subject matter right now is the Philippine Film Archive. We are actually a government institution. It's a it's a part of a national government institution, which is the Film Development Council of the Philippines, which have these following sources of funds. Primarily from the government appropriation, the annual budget that's been allocated by the Congress, no, to all the government agencies. We also receive funds from the nation, which we usually is being used on our projects like film restorations and the like. And just recently, we've been able to accumulate some funds through the services that we offered to the public. So these are actually the common sources of funds for a film archive. So generally, if it's going to be a donation, it comes from a foundation or a specific group of persons who voluntarily associate themselves for a specific purpose, or an individual who actually provides for the PFA as a beneficiary, or a private company who shares their resources to a film archive. Of, of course, as a government institution, these are subject to rules and limitations both by law and by contract. For a government institution in the country, there's a need to actually have a provision that the institution have the authority to receive donations. In the case of the Film Development Council of the Philippines, we do have such a provision, so we are allowed to receive donations. Actually, some of the films that were given to the Philippine Film Archives are actually donations from individuals and institutions. So here's the structure of the Philippine Film Archive. Um, We are actually under or a division under the Film Development Council of the Philippines, which is an office created under the Office of the President, which is part of the executive government of the Philippines. Yeah, that's how we started with the following objectives: to promote and uphold the Philippines' diverse historical, cultural, and artistic moving images. Yeah, and sound by collecting, conserving, and preserving audiovisual materials reflecting the country's rich heritage. Yeah, these are our major objectives so far. And with that, with the sources of fund, it's very important to identify how much does an archive really need to operate. So there are a lot of factors that comes in when you talk about how much do you need, but there are major contributors to that. So first is the structure and facilities. This refers to how big is your archive is. What kinds of facilities do you have to maintain, or refers to the maintenance and operating expenses of the film archive. Next is the direction. The direction dictates what kinds of facilities and structures will you be having. For example, if you're going to have printing of negatives, of course, there's a lot of difference between having the direction going to digitization alone. If you have both, it will be like a bigger and a much more expensive direction. So that will also dictate how much you will be needing. Next is the program and activities that you have. For the Philippine Film Archives, I will be presenting later on the different activities that we're doing, which affects the funds that we really need to operate and to sustain our operations. So with our programs and activities, the fundings are actually spent first on the personnel, no? The manpower or the people who's been doing all the jobs for the film archive. In the Philippine Film Archive, we may be lacking some of the facilities or some of the equipment, but we do have a lot of experienced people coming from all production companies such as LVN and Sampaguita Pictures. Next would be the maintenance and operating expenses. Maintenance, of course, the film archive usually have these film vaults that is actually getting a big chunk of all the expenses of the archives, because you really have to maintain this on a special room, that you have to maintain the temperature and humidity, aside from having the best security to secure all our collections. And for operating expenses, to all the steps that undergoes with the process of archiving, from cleaning, inspection, up to digitization and scanning, those it's a lot of the funds that are being allocated to the Philippine Film Archive. Next are the programs and projects. Right now, the Philippine Film Archive has been engaged in a lot of film screenings through the different divisions of the Film Development Council of the Philippines. We've been sending films throughout the world to all the festivals that has been requesting films from us. And of course, we do have a lot of local projects as well, such as talks, festivals that are being launched, and is usually operated by our main institution, which is the Film Development Council of the Philippines. Okay. So the factors that affects the funding are such as when you talk about facilities as a factor that affects the funding, it differs on how big or how much facilities you're keeping in the archive. Like for us, we do have this digitization and editing facilities, which is a bit small for an archive actually. But right now, we're actually expanding the capabilities of the archive to be able to cope up with the collections, because we all know that the the fight here is against time. We cannot actually stop the degradation of all our materials. We really have to migrate them to a new medium. We also have our film working area, which is actually holding a lot of the old equipments in our office. But the maintenance and the acquisition of the supplies for the use of this working area is a lot expensive actually, compared to the other office supplies that we're using. We also have our film scanner, or the film scanning room, where we do all our digitization of our films. It's actually the maintenance cost that gets a lot of the funds here. And the medium right now, unfortunately, we are actually using hard drives, and throughout the discussions in different forums, is still film would be the best medium, but to all our digital assets, we're keeping them on hard drives and on our databases. We also have our film vaults. Yeah, as I said before, it eats a lot of our operating and maintenance expenses because of the air conditioning or the cooling system that we have to maintain, as well as the daily operations that we have to do to keep the archives on a specific temperature and humidity. We also have our theaters. Actually, the Film Development Council of the Philippines is operating more than five um, cinematheques around the country right now. And a lot of these cinematheques have been showing not only the Philippine Film Archives contents, but also contemporary and new contents that have been invited and are being shown in these cinematheques. We also have our museum in Manila. It's actually just a small museum and an exhibit area located in Iloilo. So as you can see, we're not only featuring or showcasing films, but also some artifacts and some of the memorabilia that will actually provide a lot more colors to the Philippine Film Archives and the Film Development Council as well. So aside from those sources of funds that are given to the Philippine Film Archive, we are also trying to generate our own funds. Just like any other archives and other laboratories has been doing, the PFA right now is starting to offer services to the public, like film screenings, digital conversions and transfers, screenings in film festivals, film scanning and digitization, screeners and clips, and all other services. But usually, as a government agencies, we only charge a minimal amount for this. It may not be enough to sustain the whole operations of the archives, but it helps. It allows us to help our agency to come up with more funds. And aside from those sources of funds, we do also receive special funding for special projects. Um, right now, we're actually working on the PFA Film Heritage Building, which will be the permanent house for the Philippine Film Archives, as well as a cinematheque, a film library, and a film museum that will be located at the heart of Manila. It's actually intended to be established in Intramuros. We're hoping to have this building in a year or two. We're actually working on the land right now, and this will receive a special funding aside from the general appropriations being granted to the FDCP. Also, another projects or usual projects that we have that has been receiving special funds as are our film restoration projects. Um, aside from the scanning that we do, we also do simple film restoration. But to have or to achieve a better uh, a better result, or to give a respectable restoration to all our heritage films, some select titles, which mostly are our heritage films, have been restored to third-party institutions such as Retrovata and Central Digital Lab. Yeah, and that's it for the archive. Those are actually the usual fund sources for the PFA, and that's how much factors that we consider in requesting for funding in our operations, Sir Don. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Uh, I'm sure you focused on funding because it must be a major issue in you know the establishing and building the Philippine Film Archive. How difficult is it, Don, to convince politicians to support the Film
Um,
Development Council, specifically the Philippine Film Archive?
Actually, right now we're very lucky because our chairperson is very supportive of the archive. The hardest part is having all these people to understand the importance of what we are doing. It's all about appreciation of the film preservation and its importance to our history and culture. A lot of people actually doesn't really understand how these films affects the lives of the present and future generations, especially in defining who you really are and providing for a reference for our future people on who their who the Filipino peoples are.
Okay.
Why are they like that and why are they doing those things? But these things, like any other museum articles, defines who we are, and it's really
Mhm.
important for them to understand first the
Okay.
importance of this.
Has funding been allocated for the structure that you're building?
Right now, with the actually, we have a talk with several government institutions to help us with the funding for the building. But right now, all the funds of the government is being allocated for the support or to fight against COVID-19, and we do understand that. But we're very positive that in the long run, we will be able to come up with the sufficient fund to
Okay.
build the building, and with the support
Yes.
actually of the private institutions as well.
Okay. Thank you, John. We'll go back to that issue later and maybe get the uh, response and suggestions from our guests.
Thank,
Our
thank
next speaker is Beatriz de Pastre. She has been the director of collections of the Centre National du Cinéma since 2007. She is a professor and author of works dedicated to film archives. Friends, Beatriz de Pastre. You're You have to unmute your microphone, Beatrice.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's
There,
better now.
there.
It's okay?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
sorry.
Thank you.
Hello,
Yes.
everybody. Can you show my PowerPoint, please? And I'm happy to present you different missions for cinematographic heritage of the French National Center of Cinema and Moving Image, CNC. Next slide, please. At first, I quickly speak about its history. CNC was created after the Second World War in 1946 to support, first of all, cinematographic creation and help cinematographic industries. CNC also negotiated international deals like Bloomberg's agreements in 1946 that fixed the percentage of American movies on French screens. The specific functioning of CNC is founded on the collect of taxes on all companies which make business with movie image, theater at first, and after television, and now internet platforms. And CNC redistribute those taxes to producer for creation. It's a virtual circle. In 1969, CNC had a new mission, protecting film heritage. That mission is next slide, please. Yes, thank you. That mission is organized around 4 texts: financial aids for French heritage to institutions like Cinémathèque de Toulouse, Cinémathèque Française, Institut Lumière, and small institutions who protect cinematographic heritage across French territory. It's also an aid to international institutions. CNC has international expertise in conservation and restoration of films. It restores by example, a film for Tunisian Ministry of Culture or for National Archive of Mongolia's Republika, or for the FDCP at Manila, Gina Uooko Gina Gutom Ako of Mr. Belem. Third, CNC manages in Bois d'Arcy, a Parisian suburb, a very important collection. More than 1 million of scans. They are preserved in special storage, described in a database, and restored. Films which are restored will be presented in festivals in French and in different archives which belong to International Federation of Film Archives, the FIAF. Fourth, CNC helps right holders to make use of their catalog. And next point. Okay. Digital era is a difficult time for cinematographic companies. They did not have digital copies. A century of French cinema couldn't be seen by spectators. Also, CNC helps rights holders. First, to find in laboratory material to digitalize. It's a start of national inventory in 2011. It's necessary to know where it is and what holders can digitalize. All cans are open in laboratory to recognize if it's a negative, a copy, a controtype, a copy, and so on. Two, when holders know where is the material, in which chemical state, CNC gives money for digitalization and restoration. It's funds for digitalizing cinematographic heritage, which started in 2012 with European Commission's agreement. Next slide. Why CNC organized that aid? Access for large public in theater and television, expand legal offer on internet, preserve and pass down the cinematographic heritage to next generation. What are the things concerned by that aid? Silent film, speaking films, short film, feature films, fiction, documentary, animation. Aren't concerned newsreel, advertising, and TV films. Next slide. And it's some poster of movie who are digitalized next. It's a silent film, famous Fallon film, Jean-Luc Godard film, and next animation, Paul Grimaud, famous animator in France, and the last, for example, it's a documentary, Nicolas Philibert's documentary, La Ville Louvre. Next poster, please. Okay. Next slide. Now I present you the results of funds between 2012 and 2020. 1,496 files were examined by experts group, and 1,113 films were restored. Total funds attributes represent more than 66 million euros. Next slide. In that slide, you can see the evolution on the aids during 9 years. We can notice that CNC gives less money now that last years than the 7 previous. Next slide, please. Here you can observe the repartition between short and feature film, documentary, and fiction films. Next slide. And now, in conclusion, that marvelous cake or camembert, which represents the different rights holders, we receive money by CNC to restore a part or all their catalogue. But diversity is a French specialty and the result of more than 70 years of CNC policies. The uploading of many independent companies. Some of them, like Pathé or Gaumont, have been alive since the end of 19th century, and CNC helps them in the using of their catalogue. And last slide, please. And in that last slide, you can discover some first film we've written in theater. Many scream after their first display on screen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. You mentioned in CNC you have 1 million cans in your collection, and what would be the percentage of these would be silent films?
I think
would you have
20
data
20
about that?
20%. It's
20%?
very important collections because in France
I see.
we know we conserved the old company collection like Pathé, Gaumont, and they lost only 20% of their production. And now we have several thousands of cans of silent movie, but it's difficult to recognize some of them. We have no title and just a can on 4 or 5. It's difficult sometimes to reconstruct all the movies, silent movies.
I see. So that keeps you busy, reconstructing and identifying these films.
Yes, it's a work in archive who have silent films.
Are there still silent films that come out from nowhere and you would consider as great discovery? Do you still get silent films?
Yeah, in that program, silent film is a very small part of the program because the owners, it's a financial risk for owners to restore that movie, and it's very difficult to return in theater, and television don't want play on their screen, and it's only the Vampire, Louis Feuillat's famous film, or Napoleon of Abel Gance, Napoleon. It's a famous film, and it's international reputation for this film. But for many of other film, silent documentary and short comedies, it's difficult to return on theater. And CNC made several years ago long plan to that special films.
Thank you. I just want to remind our attendees, if you have questions, just write them down, and we'll discuss them with the panelists after their presentations. Our next speaker is Daibo Masaki. Daibo is the head of film collection at the National Film Archive of Japan. He's in charge of film acquisitions and preservation of the National Film Archive of Japan collection. Friends, Daibo Masaki. Hello, Daibo.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I want to begin my presentation with this title, Multiple Versions of Silent Films, Unstable Concept of Original. Our archive had the privilege of contributing 6 animated films to today's screening program. Which will be streamed with live musical accompaniment from 6 p.m. All 6 works are also available for viewing through the Japanese Animated Film Classic streaming site run by our archive, and only one of the films, the Dark Souls 1917, animated by Junichi Kouchi, which is the oldest surviving Japanese animation, will be presented in a different version today. The digitally listed version showcased on the site is somewhat longer here, the left side here. Okay. I sent you a link to the site so you can take a look at the film while I continue talking. The reason for this is that the longer version cannot be shown without the permission of Mr. Natsuki Matsumoto, the film historian who found the original copy. And as this would have gotten rather expensive for the festival, we resorted to showing the non-coin version of the film, which was discovered by our archive. So even if a film is technically in public domain, gestures of respect to the individual who discovered it can sometimes be necessary. This, perhaps, is one example of the challenges silent film archiving entails. What I want to illustrate with the example of the Dark Souls is that when it comes to the silent film era, the existence of one highly authentic version of any given work is the exception rather than the rule. And many silent films that we are working with today have changed hands countless times since their original release, and have been cut and recut by its various presenters and owners. Obtaining a silent film in the form that it was originally released is extremely rare. Our understanding of what was the original form of the Dark Sword has also changed over the years as alternative versions have been discovered. In 2008, when Mr. Matsumoto first announced a copy at the flea market, it was naturally assumed that this is the complete version. It contained the beginning and the end. However, as the version with blue tinting that will be streamed today was later discovered in our archive's non-coin collection, the completeness of the film came into question. By the way, non-coin was a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients that looked like this. Films were often screened to the patients there, and large amounts of the nitrate prints left at the facility were later donated to us. And then 3 years ago, a third miracle occurred. The film historian Haruhiko Honchi, he managed to obtain a third version of the Dark Sword at an online auction. Miracles like this keep happening in Japan thanks to the existence of so-called toy films like this. 35mm prints of mostly animated children's film that people enjoyed in their homes at the time. Even now, numerous toy films remain hidden in Japanese households, waiting to be discovered. While the overall survival rate of pre-war Japanese films is not even 20%, but more than 40% of animated films survive. This is an astonishing figure. I would like to use a little bit more time about the charm of the Dark Swords, which was further emphasized by the discovery of this third version. This animated film has a classical introduction and developments, term and conclusion story structure, like a 4 frames comic strip, and at a glimpse, looks like an approachable children's film. It is important to know, however, that Junichi Kouchi, who made this film, has spent the 10 or so years leading up to its release satirizing authority in political cartoons that he drew various newspapers and magazines at the time. The Dark Souls 2 is interspersed with scenes where the sword-wielding samurai who should be in a position of power is ridiculed by people of lower standing, such as the head clerk of swords, blind master, and the courier. This particularly evident in the following scene with the exaggerated emphasis on the facial expression of the blind master. Wait a minute. I'm showing the two versions side by side, but please pay attention to the master's facial expression on the right. This scene was not included in the first two versions. And the discovery of this scene and the grotesque facial expression that crystallizes the psychological dynamics of the characters further emphasizes the anti-authoritarian dimension of Junichi Kouchi. Coming across the original version of the Dark Sword right away is highly unlikely, but thanks to the popularity of the toys films that were sold individually in Japan at the time, three historic discoveries followed one another and made it possible to obtain this probably almost complete version of the film. Thank you.
Thank you, Taibo. So what are we going to see today? Is it the non-coin version?
Non-coin version. Non-coin version, blue version.
9-coin version. I see.
Yes.
And will there be a Banshee in the presentation?
Yeah, Banshee and musical accompaniment.
Musical accompaniment. I see.
Yeah, musical accompaniment.
I see. Yeah, the Banshee or the performer who narrated every silent film screenings in Japan was integral in the experience, no, of silent films. Are there documents? Are there documents of recordings of the Banshee that are part of your archival collection?
Yeah, every year we hold a week-long event, Silent Cinema Days, at our archive, screening silent films with Banshee and musical accompaniments. And as we don't have any Banshees and pianists working full-time at our archive, we always rely on the services of talent film as a private sector. So in recent years, the activities of silent film narrators, Banshee, have been particularly remarkable. The prominent Banshee, Mr. Ichiro Kataoka, for instance, has penned a 500-page history of his profession. Of course, archive also collects silent film scores and bench scripts and recording of bench narrations.
I see. I see. So there are still at present Banshees who do.
Yeah, in some screening of silent films.
Today, when you screen silent films?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's quite interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much, Daibo, and we'll go back to discussion later. Our next speaker is Andrea Meneghelli. He is the curator of the film collections at Cineteca di Bologna. He has edited DVD collections devoted to Italian documentary films in the silent era and Italian ethnographic documentaries. He has published several articles in history, and he is a member of the advisory board of Il Cinema Ritrovata, an annual film festival in Bologna. Friends, Andrea Meneghelli.
Oh, thank you,
Andrea.
thank you very much, first of all, for your invitation to this international webinar. Thanks also to Philippine Italian Association for this opportunity. I will say at the beginning that I'm not a technician of the restoration. If you ask me to handle a software performing digital restoration or digital correction, I panic. I'm a supervisor and advisor for some restoration, mainly Italian silent films. It means that in cooperation with the technicians, I search for the best way to restore a film. And given that any film has its peculiar problems, any film needs different solutions. The holy totem of any restoration has a name, and its name is the original. In short, the goal of restoration should be to reach the same quality, the same look of the original, which is a big trouble because in our field, as Mr. Masaki already told us, the original is something tricky, slippery, fleeting, I would say. For me, the original is a kind of a ghost. We try to reach him and to grab him, but he's always ready to run away. The original plays something like a hide and seek with the restorer. And that's why the restoration is also a matter of guessing, a matter of approximation. When a restoration is finally done, you must always feel a bit disappointed, a bit frustrated. If you hear something to say, that the restoration is perfect. It's exactly like the original was. Don't trust him. It's marketing. It's press release. Nothing against marketing and press offices, but they often forget that the restoration is a kind of a simulacrum, a tentative copy of an original, which is never fully reachable. Honestly, that's fascinating and challenging too. That's particularly true for silent film and color in silent, for several reasons. I will talk briefly about two of those reasons. The first one is related to the physical nature of the film, which is an object made of material. It is subject to the laws of entropy, and it suffers chemical decay. And because of that decay, it loses its original qualities. The second reason is related to technological shifts. Today, we have at our disposal a technology which is completely different from the technology available a century or more ago. And I'm not saying that our technology is better or worse. I'm just saying that it's different. Now let me show you an example, a brief example of, here we are, of a silent film suffering chemical decay which spoiled the original color. It is an Italian film made in 1907 called Sicilia Illustrata, Sicily Illustrated. It is one of those kind of films very popular at that time, about the beauty of the landscapes of distant countries. Films that took people on virtual touristic trips around the world, even if you did not move from your seat. In this example, here we see the scan before the digital restoration. We have a combination of two methods of coloring silent films, tinting and toning. I fear I do not have enough time to add technical details about tinting and toning. Anyway, you can clearly see how the color here is faded, is fluctuating, and it is not easy to understand how the original hues were. That's enough, maybe. Okay. As I told before, the second problem is a problem of technology. To put it simply, our technology today has nothing to do with the technology available 100 or more years ago. We take a material and dematerialize it, obtaining a digital string of zeros and ones. The digital technology is an amazing tool, but it must be handled with care. And we must be aware that the digital color is different from an analog color from a 35mm print. Simply, it does not look the same, today at least. Tomorrow, who knows? Now I will show you another example of digital restoration. And it is an example of the huge help provided by the digital technology in restoring color. This is a French film made in 1910 about traditional hats and dressing in Holland. The technique this time is the so-called stencil, which permits to split the frame in different sections and color every section in a different way. On the left, you have before the color correction, and on the other side, you have after the color correction, sorry. Stop sharing. In this case, the digital gave us great results. At the end of my speech, I want to underline how nowadays there is no software able to substitute the eye, the sensitivity, the knowledge of the human being doing the restoration. Of course, you can be good or bad in doing it, and maybe tomorrow will be finally useless, but we'll see. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. So that's interesting, no? The issue of color in silent film, and so if the material, the original material, has lost its hues, has lost its color, so where do you base the what colors to use in restoring the film?
Yeah. In some cases, the color is not completely faded, so you can look with attention to the print and guess if in that specific frame there was, for example, a blue. But it's more difficult to say what kind of blue it was. We have several kind of blues. It was a pure blue, a blue mixed with green, etc., etc., etc. And that's very, very difficult. Of course, when you restore a film, you do the digital, watching careful always the original print. If you're lucky, you can find another print of the same film helping you, but it's not always the case. It's more a rarity, because when you restore a silent film, in many cases you have just one single copy. Another thing that can be useless, it's to search for other films made, for instance, by the same production company in the same year. So if I have a film made in, I don't know, 1911 by an Italian company called Ambrosio Film, I'm going to search for other film made by the same company in the same year. And if I have, I don't know, a kind of red or a kind of orange, and I'm lucky to have found another copy of another title of the same production company with an orange, I can guess that in my restoration, I can try to make reference to that kind of orange to reconstruct my film. So it is very important, the experience of the restorer, who knows how that technology works, who knows other examples of other films made in those same years. But as I told you, I think in many cases, perfection is not possible. So we are working for approximation. We try to be honest, but we must be aware that perfection does not exist.
Yes, so the challenge is how to approximate the original.
Absolutely.
To be as close as possible,
Yes.
possible to the original.
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you, Andrea.
Sorry if I interrupt you. It's important always
No.
to declare what you did, not to say I've done a perfect work, but say I've done a work that tomorrow could be more perfect. Let's say more perfect. Better.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm sure we'll go back to that issue of colorizing the film during the discussion. Our next speaker is Luciano Palumbo. He is a film restorer, and I think Luciano is very much into restoration, the technical aspect of it. He's the point person for restoration at Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau Foundation in Wiesbaden, Germany. He has curated the digital restoration of various German silent and sound films. and he's very much into film digitization today. Friends, I'd like to introduce to you Luciano Palumbo.
Hello,
Luciano.
thank you very much for your invitation.
Hello.
The mission of the Murnau Foundation is to preserve and make accessible early German film heritage to a broad audience, in which aim we digitize and restored films belonging the canon of German cinema, such as Metropolis, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and Nosferatu. In this framework, the foundation recently restored the sound and the silent version of Liebling der Götter, a film directed by Hans Schwarz, starring Emil Jannings, Renate Müller, and Hans Moser, and released 1930, distributed in the US under the title Darling of the Gods. At the time, Emil Jannings was a film star famous worldwide. At the age of 46, he already starred under the direction of Lubitsch, Murnau, and von Sternberg. He earned great success also in Hollywood, where he won the very first Oscar as Best Actor for the movies The Way of All Flesh by Victor Fleming and The Last Commander by von Sternberg. Janning co-produced Darling of the Gods together with UFA, the first German film production corporation, founded on 1917 and constantly spreading from the beginning of the 20s. In this film is narrated the fictional story of the acclaimed opera singer Albert Winkelmann, experiencing in the middle of a tournée abroad the nightmare of not being capable of mastering his voice, overcome by the revenge of his tired body. When he came back to his country, he had to decide how to react and how to manage his reputation, his emotional ties, his career. Contrary to the United States, where the transition from silent to sound film has been softer, nominally spread on around 3 years, the German film industry of the 20s and the 30s involved itself in a sort of gold rush for the new medium. UFA exploited the new possibilities offered by the new medium by starting its expansion abroad, especially by distributing different export versions of the same title, mostly by employing local actors for each market instead of dubbing or synchronize. So why was made of this film a silent version, despite it was already shot as talkie? The reasons are multiple. It is often forgotten or simply not taken into account that even in the transition from silent to sound, a part of the audience could simply prefer the silent, disliking the sound. The sound apparatus of the first equipped theaters was extremely complex, and not every projectionist was able to use it without a background in music field. Aside of all this systems were quite expensive and not affordable at all for the average theater operator, who was therefore forced to find handmade solutions. A muted version of the film could give the chance to make this whole thing easier. The film just needed a musical accompaniment with a few hits through which appeal the public and some background noise sufficient to give appearance of likelihood, which anyway did not require great sound quality. It was easier to export if it's considered that the distributor or exporter only needed to replace the intertitles, nevertheless with no need to replace the well-known Emil Jannings. Finally, it could be also exploited as traditional silent, especially in the province where the theaters mostly still weren't equipped. During the restoration project, it came immediately out that each of the two versions come from a different camera negative, while the soundtrack of the silent version appears to be a rearrangement of the one of the sound version, whose were practically cutting away the dialogues and added a music background according to a different length of each shot in sequence. In this frame, it is worth to consider that the original negative of the sound version is still existent and was used as source for the scan, while the negative of the silent one did not survive. Both versions have been scanned in 4K. The soundtrack has been digitally scanned via COSP. Comparing the two versions is very strong the feeling that all shots were taken with no distinction if for the silent or the sound one. Although the rhythm is radically different, since the sound version has longer shots, that assure Emil Jannings a right space and time to express his presence. The dramatic aspect of the sound version is way similar to a theatrical play, less dynamic than in the silent version, with no creative side in the coexistence of sound and image. The editing of the silent version, on the contrary, is faster and varied, with a larger use of close-ups, despite of the many full shots of the sound version. Following the same structure, also the length of the intertitles is shorter and essential than the talked ones. In other words, the silent version is made silent by the editing. In conclusion, Liebling der Götter deserves to be treated as an interesting case study because it gives the chance to observe how it intended the communicative transition from silent to sound film in terms of cinematic language and technique, and why a production company would have eventually invested in a double version of the same film. I thank you very much for your attention and wish you to enjoy the festival and the screenings.
Thank you, Luciano. We study more now in our film class. You know, we've discussed Nosferatu, Faust, The Last Laugh, and Sunrise. Murnau was a major figure of the silent cinema. Are there still works by Murnau that your organization is in the process of restoring?
One must say there's not a lot still surviving from Murnau. So all well-known works of him are already been digitally restored. So to answer your question, in this very moment, no, we have no other film of Murnau processing for digitalization.
Okay, so now no film has come out of the blue, you know,
Unfortunately.
and discovered. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How big is the collection of the Murnau Foundation?
Well, we have around 20,000 silent film and 10,000 talkies, sound films, plus 3,000 short films, industrial films, and trick films. One must say the collection of the Murnau Foundation goes until mostly until 1935. That means the most part of our collection is indeed silent. And as I mentioned, some of the film belonging in the canon of German cinema are part of it.
I see. I just want to remind our attendee, please send questions through the Q&A box feature or via the chat box. To the panelists, if you have questions, or let's do this as a discussion, panel discussion. If you want to say something or just jump in and join the discussion. Thank you. Maybe we can start with since Don started with the issue of funding. How big an issue is that in your organization? Do you have a regular source of funding, and where do you source your funding? And maybe we can get some response from our friends.
Actually, right now we're
from Europe.
Actually, right now we're Sir Doy. Actually, right now we're fortunate enough that the FDCP has been allocating funds for the PFA, for its daily operations. But talking about expansions, we can actually do more.
The Film Development Council,
Yes, but the PFA can actually do more should the government allot more funds to provide and expand its facilities, like adding more workstations and adding more people to do with our films. And we, with the understanding that it's actually time that we're trying to beat here, it's really important for us to expand the manpower and the workstations to be able to, unfortunately for us, the direction is to digitize everything, to have everything scanned and digitized so that we can provide an access copy for the public to enjoy and to be shown in the future as well. But in terms of funding right now, we're fortunate enough that a
Okay.
lot has been provided to us. We can actually say that it's a year for the archives right now because a lot of focus has been provided to the PFA, and our chairperson has been very positive on in sending support to the PFA by providing us all the necessary supplies that we need. Unlike well, as we understand, it's the archive is very young, and a lot of understanding is really need to be able to come up with a better archive.
Okay. Okay. Maybe idea from Beatrice. How is the CNC funded?
Yes, like I explained in my presentation, money come from taxes, and it's at the beginning for creation and industry, and when the heritage mission arrives for CNC, a part of this taxi go
Is it tax? Is it
taxes on
is it taxes from the movie ticket?
yes, moving tickets and
Taxes from where?
publicity on
Yeah.
television, and now a percentage
Uh-huh.
on benefits of platform internet.
I
It's
see.
now
I see.
discussions between platform and French
Uh-huh.
government and CNC.
I see.
It's a principle in France that all companies will make business with moving image must be contribute to the creation and protecting from film heritage, and parts
Mhm.
4% of CNC budget go to a film my direction of heritage,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, that's
we
interesting. So
redistribute to holders, and a part of this money is for our laboratory and the teams, and to restore inside our laboratory film, like Andrea explained. We make the same work on silent film and documentary. I like very much his presentation, because we are the same preoccupation.
yeah, I see. So that's interesting. So when the people pay their taxes, they know that a percentage of their tax would go to the
Yeah,
archive,
yes.
and
It's a
that's
virtuous
for
circle that
cultural heritage.
yes, it's the virtual circles that I explained in my presentation. It's very important. The system
Yes.
is very
Okay.
important to is a guarantee to be continue the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Andrea, in the Cineteca di Bologna, is that government funded too?
We are not a national institution. We are a foundation, so we try to have money from
Okay.
everywhere we can. Most of all, we got to say that our main fundings come from the municipality of Bologna. We have some funding also from the national government for specific projects. For instance, now we are working on a big project on digitization of Italian film heritage, and the government helps us with a good funding, that 70% of the cost of restoration, and we're building a new repository for film with the help of the government. We participated to European project projects, co-funded by the European community. We search for sponsors, of course, and also we sell, because, for instance, we publish books and DVDs, Blu-rays, etc. We have a distribution company which distributes heritage film in theaters. Of course, the COVID this year was a disaster for us, because we weren't able to distribute our films. So briefly, we have money from different sources, and it is a struggle every year. This year was a huge struggle, but let's be confident for the future. Okay. And
Luciano is. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andrea. Finish your.
Simply to say that I thank you so much, but I must leave you immediately.
Oh, okay.
So thank you so much. Very happy to be here with you this morning.
Thank you very much
you.
For sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much.
And the films the videos that you showed are quite interesting. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you
so much.
Luciano, is the Murnau Foundation also funded like the Cineteca di Bologna?
From
private sources?
Is privately founded from private sources. Of course, we participate to the national program for film heritage preservation, and that kind of funds are public funds, but they are only and specifically thought for digitization and digital restoration.
I see. Daibo, the archive in Japan, that is government funded?
Yes, most of our activities are funded by the governments, but this is one of the our archive's weak points. That is that can be seen in our official name, Independent Administrative Institution, National Film Archive of Japan. So we are expected to operate independently, and increasingly the numbers of regular staff is extremely difficult for us. So in reality, we are operating with 11 regular staff and several dozen part-time employees. But it is clear that 11 people is not nearly enough to manage our archive with such a rich film culture. We currently have more than 10,000 titles to take care of. So as a measure to counter this state of affairs, we now have an arrangement with the big film companies like Toho, Shochiku, Toei, whose negative we are deposited, that they also dispatch some of their employees to help out our archive. Okay.
Yes. Just one last question. We have a few minutes left. How long does it take to restore a film? I'm sure it varies from one project to another, but would you give us an idea, like Daibo in the film, the animated film, The Dull Sword? How long did it take to restore that film?
Per one film? Each film?
The Dull Sword. Yeah, The Dull Sword.
Okay,
the
but
Honcho version.
probably it takes 2
and
or
the
3 months.
non-coin.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
2 or 3 months for restore the animation.
I see.
Film
I
scanning
see.
and
Luciano, how about you? Yeah. I'm sorry, Luciano, how about the project that you described, the silent sound film? How long
it took
did it take you to restore it?
for the sound version, it took about a year, and the silent version is still being restoring. In this amount of time, I also take into account the time that we use for all research about which elements are for us interesting by comparing them and so on. Yes, it could take quite longer. In this case, it was I would not say short, but not that much long as for other projects that we currently restored.
Yeah, thank you. Beatrice, just one question for you. In your collection, what in your collection would you say are you most proud of?
It's difficult because there are many treasures, but perhaps the more symbolic, it's Lumière Catalogue, the first film of history of cinema, and
yes.
All the films of catalog are restored, and
I see.
19 are lost. Only 19, and it's the first production of history of cinema, and we are very proud of this part of collection. It's a small part, but very important symbolically, and it's an extraordinary fact that we are here in totality, and we reconstruct this last years the catalog with the different views, and I hope it's in a library in a few months, and it's very important work to show how first operator of history of cinema work and think images and movement and movement across the image.
Yes, thank you, Beatrice. I'm
sorry. I must leave you.
Yes,
I have another meeting.
Yes,
and thank you for your invitation.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased to speak with Manila today.
Thank you, Beatrice. Yeah, we're done. Actually, we're closing now. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
So we now end this webinar with a better understanding, I hope, of film archiving and its value in the life of a nation. Thanks to our guests for sharing their work and their ideas. Maraming salamat po. Thanks to archivists around the world who understand deeply the value of the past. Maybe we can end with a resolve to support every step that is taken to save the memory of our cultural heritage. We can start by watching this year's edition of the International Silent Film Festival online. So thank you very much. I now give you Alessandro Milani for the closing of this webinar. Alessandro?
Yes, I was giving the honor of the last words of this very interesting panel discussion. I would like to, on behalf of all the co-organizers, I would like to express our thanks to Professor Clodoaldo Del Mundo Jr. for moderating this panel, and also, of course, to all our guests. Don Gervin Arawan, Mr. Daibo Masaki, Ms. Beatrice De Pastra, Mr. Andrea Meneghelli, and Mr. Luciano Palumbo. The video recording of this webinar will be available on the Facebook page of the festival, the International Silent Film Festival, Manila, and we will also upload it on the streaming platform of the website, which is called I Watch More. The webinar is finished, but the festival is starting. So we would like to invite everybody to watch all the program of this year, of this 14th edition of the festival. All the silent movies will be accompanied by music created expressly for these movies. So it won't be this year a live cine concert, but still the concept will remain, even if recorded. All these movies will be screened on iWatchMore.com. So let's see. Let's take a look at the schedule. You see it there. At 6 p.m. today, we have 6 short Japanese animation classics from 1917 to 1933, and you will see the Dull Sword among the others, which was discussed earlier. Tomorrow, sorry, and it will be accompanied by the music of Hiroko Nagal, Harold Andre, and Jordan Peralta. Tomorrow, on Saturday, at 11 a.m., you will have a super recent movie. Actually, it will be in world premiere. It's the only not classic movie of the program. Is a timely docu-fiction called The Silent Killer by Ruben Soriques, and it's presented by I Watch More Originals. In the afternoon, you will have a super classic on the other side of the Italian cinema and literature, Malombra, a Gothic drama from 1917, restored recently by the Cineteca di Bologna. And you will see there a superb performance of Lida Borelli, the first diva of the Italian cinema. And the music will come from a super well-known pianist, Filipino pianist, super well-known on the international scene, Dr. Raul Sunico. And on Sunday at 11 a.m., you will have another classic of the French cinema, the Manor of Fear, The Black Man. 1924 police fantasy scored by the jazz airs of Michael Mark Guevara saxophone. And we will close the program on Sunday at 6 p.m. with Metropolis, a super classic of not just the German cinema, but of the world silent cinema, the first big colossal ever produced, I think. I mean, at the time it was the largest colossal produced in the world, and it's a most welcome return to the International Silent Film Festival, and it will be scored by Teenage Granny with the ensemble at Terminal Garden. And yes, all the movies start at the schedule that we mentioned, and then will be available for the following 7 hours. And that's it. So I would like to invite everybody to watch, and don't forget to take selfies of you watching the movies, and post it with the hashtag ISFF2020. And well, enjoy the festival. Buona visione.